So, tonight, or yesterday by the time you watch this, they aired the newest episode of Tales of the Territory, talking about the legacy of WCCW World Class Championship Wrestling. But before I get into that, I want to touch upon last week's, because I didn't get a chance to talk about it, even though I did watch it. I actually watched it over the weekend. Actually, I watched it on, I think it was Sunday, 2 days ago, or 3 days ago actually, by the time you watch this video. And I watched it on demand because I did DVR it, and I was able to watch it because of that through the on-demand option. And and the main focus for that episode was Portland Wrestling, Pacific Northwest Wrestling, PNW. And I can tell you, as a wrestling fan for a long time, that I would watch. I wouldn't watch, but I would read the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines. I would try to get one every once in a while. And, on the bottom, in the back of the magazine most of the time, and there were various times they would move it around, but most of the time, and I think even to this day, they would keep it in the back. They would have a list of, I guess what they would consider the top tier promotions around at that time. And of course they had WCW, NWA, they had USW, I think they just became USWA at the time. They had WWE or WWF, and then they also had like Japan and Mexico, but right in the middle, I think right before they showed who the champion and the top 10 contenders were for Mexico and Japan in their respective organizations. Right in the middle they would have PNW, which was Pacific Northwest Wrestling. And I kind of knew about it through that, and I think that was through its waning years, basically its last year of existence. And I would always hear stories about it, mostly give credit and a shout out to Wrestling with Regret, Brian Zane, who, believe it or not, I think was inspired by the Portland wrestling scene, because he's from Portland, he's from the Oregon area, and he's back there, he's living back in that area now, to basically, go into business with some people and create, I think, what was it, PPW, not Power Pro Wrestling, but basically, what's the show he has now? Can't think of it, but basically go into I'm gonna look this up right now. POW Pro Wrestling. That's POW Pro Wrestling. POW Pro Wrestling. To basically create and be a booker and behind the scenes hand person with POW Pro Wrestling. And again, he was inspired to do this, in my opinion, although I don't know if he really said anything, because of his love for Portland wrestling, and mostly because the figurehead at Portland wrestling on screen was Playboy Buddy Roberts. No, not Buddy Roberts, but Buddy Rose, not Rose. I was just thinking about Roberts from the recent episode they just did, but Playboy Buddy Rose, who trained Zane actually to get into the business, trained him to be a wrestler. And basically that's why I think we have POW Pro Wrestling right now. I think, basically because of the fact that, I think Zane felt that there's been an absence of professional wrestling in Portland, and mostly in the Eugene, Portland area, that need to be filled. And with POW Pro Wrestling, which he showcases an episode every Monday, from what I understand, he's wanting to fill that void, and he's done just that. And he's had some notable names come through there, some that you've seen on MLW, AEW, Impact. They've come through there, and they've been showcased. They have been showcased. So, to me, I got more of an idea of what Portland wrestling was just through hearing what Brian Zane would talk about out in his videos, and from what he found out through his training with Buddy Rose. But the episode, I thought, did a good job talking about talking about what Portland wrestling was, and how basically it'd been on the air essentially it'd been on the air on television for essentially nothing. I mean, basically the Portland networks, and there were two of them that broadcasted it, basically didn't ask for a dime in return from Don Owens or his brother Elton Owens. They didn't, ask for a dime in return for broadcasting them. Another thing that was interesting too was finding out that, if it wasn't for Buddy Rose, none of us would be able to enjoy via YouTube, the footage that we have of Portland wrestling, because Don Owens would always use the same master tape to record the weekly shows over and over. It's like he would use it to record one show, and then after he was done, using that tape to, allow the television network or the television station to showcase their show, he would tape over that episode with a new episode, and then, run it back again. It was like, okay, here's the new episode for you guys. There you go, play it, done, and everything. And then he would take it back, obviously, and tape over it and say, okay, here you go again. So on and so forth. And Len Denton, who was the grappler, and I know about the grappler. I've heard about him in, classic NWA, and I think he had a brief little appearance in WWF at one point, as well as I think World Class, which I'll touch upon a little bit. He basically would tell Don, why don't you just buy some new tapes? You're going to lose this footage. And Don's excuse was, I don't need to do that because no one's going to care about these things, afterwards or a week later or whatever. And that even Don said, hey, it's just the same blankety-blank matches I've seen before, But yeah, they did a good job talking about it. And the figureheads that they had on the round table for this were interesting, to say the least. They had, of course, like I said, they had Len Denton. They had Princess Victoria, who was also interviewed for Dark Side of the Ring when they talked about Moolah on that episode. They had Princess Victoria. Who else did they have? I can't think of the figureheads that they had at that time. Oh, they had Bushwhacker. Oh no, they had Bushwhacker Luke. He was on there. So they had Len Denton, Bushwhacker Luke, Princess Victoria. They had Mike Masters, who had passed away after this had been done back in August due to cancer. And I think they had one more. I can't remember who it was, but anyway, they all together did a great job. And I will admit, Mike Masters kind of stood out as the one that really stole the show when it came to talking about some stories and everything. And in fact, one story he talked about is Rose asked him to go check his house, to ride with him back to his house before he took him back to the hotel he was staying at. And Masters at first didn't want to do it. Rose said, I would pay you $50 if you do it. And he said, okay, pay me the $50 right now and I'll do it. So he paid him, according to dramatization. And the reason Buddy Rose wanted Mike Masters to do that was because of the fact that basically Buddy legitimately had heat with Matt Bourne, who went on to be the original Doink the Clown in WWF, and before that was Big Josh in WCW, the NWA WCW. Anyway, they had legit heat because Buddy had married Matt's sister, Thea Bourne, I think. Thea Bourne. I don't know. I think that's what her name was. Thea. And of course, this was basically, I think, originally just supposed to be like an angle or something like that got turned legitimate, got turned real behind the scenes. To the point that when Buddy Rose decided to basically cheat on Matt's sister and go back to his original girl at that time, Matt got so infuriated that he went to Buddy's house, knocked the door, kicked the door open, and started wailing and beating on Buddy Rose. But according to some of the reports that I think Luke and others talked about, they said that basically they described it. I think Len Denton heard this, that they basically described it as Buddy was fighting back as well, like he was scratching and crawling on Matt and everything, and Matt ended up getting put in jail for at least 2 days for what he did. And then when he got out, but then as soon as Matt got out, he wanted to go after Buddy again, and the person standing in between Buddy and Matt was Buddy's father, who was also a wrestler for the territory at that time. So they touched upon a lot of good things, a lot of interesting stories here. Some were exaggerated, there's no doubt. I'm not going to deny that. But when you hear it from the voices of those that were part of it, there's definitely truth, but the exaggeration is there. For example, and I say this with all due respect to the woman, Princess Victoria, who got her start in Pacific Northwest, as a fan, and then became a wrestler due to the fact that they took her in because I guess she had no other place to go, and let her, live out her dream, got a chance to be part of this battle royal where the men and the women were going to be involved. And it was all Buddy Rose's idea, because Buddy Rose, in and out of the ring, loved to get heat. He loved to get some heat on him so that, people would tune in or come in to attend, basically to see him get his butt whipped. And they showed this interview with Rose and Victoria, where Rose basically said, women shouldn't be in the battle royal, and he basically kind of gave a love tap, a little love slap to Victoria to prove it when she confronted him. And her answer was, well, a kick to the balls, literally. So what happened, basically, long story short, she explains that she was like the second to last in there, in the battle royal, in her hometown of Salem, Oregon. And this one, it looked like she had tossed out, I think it was Rip Oliver, I think. It might have been Rip Oliver, because they didn't say it was Rip Rogers. I think it had to be Rip Oliver, because that's the only other name I can see associated, or I've heard associated with Pacific Northwest. Anyway, basically what happened is, unbeknownst to her, after she looked like she had tossed Rip out, Buddy pulled Rip in behind her back, and then both of them basically picked her up and tossed her out of the ring and into a brick wall, where basically when she hit that brick wall back first, it cracked the back of her head open, and her brother, her little brother, who was like a couple years younger than her, got up to the ring, got out of out of the audience, came up to the ring, and basically was threatening to go after Buddy, saying, if you ever touch her, you ever touch her again, I'll, blankety blank, you son of you SOB. And he had to be escorted out by security. And the reason for this, as Victoria recalls, is when she went to the back and basically the boys applauded her and everything for the effort she did, and went on to ask, who was that, and she explained it was her brother, and everything coming to her defense. Their reaction was, wait a minute, so you didn't smarten up your family? Because anybody that was in the business, either it was Portland Wrestling at that time, or World Class, which I'll talk about in a little bit, or anywhere else, usually if you were in that business as a wrestler, man or woman, you had to take the time to smarten up your family to the fact that, hey, what you're going to see, is, the stories, the scenarios and everything, it's all an act. It's all basically rehearsed. That yes, the bumps and the hits and everything are real, but everything else it's all staged. It's basically like a soap opera. And she never did that. I'm assuming she did it afterwards, but she never did it before that. They did talk about how Portland ended up getting a commission, a wrestling commission, and how basically this commission did not like them, in their opinion, that they did everything they could in their power to want to put them out. And Lynn Denton had to smarten Don Owens up, because Don Owens basically didn't want to deal with this commission, and he had to smarten him up and say, look man, I've worked in places, mainly Texas, where they have this stuff, and if you don't work with them, you don't do business with them, they will make your life a living hell. So obviously Don Owens, apparently, from what was told, came to and said, okay, fine, I'll work with the commission. And he would pay a fee every week. But the commission had, some rules. You had to get, an AIDS test, you had to get your shots, all that stuff. But the main rule they also had was there was to be no bleeding. You could not have blood in any of your matches, no matter what, or else you're going to be suspended for a week, and you could have your license to book in that town, taken away from you. So what happened is Lynn Denton, as the grappler, basically was thinking, okay, how do we get around this? Because that's what people have gotten accustomed to when it comes to cage matches or coal miners' gloves matches and stuff like that. It's like, what do we do? How do we work around that? And John Nord, known as the Berserker in WWF, said, I have an idea. And his idea was to get, gallons of milk, tons of gallons of milk, and tons of cereal, and use that to kind of basically work their way around it. And then that thought, well, wait a minute, are you crazy? Why would we do that? And Nord's answer was, dude, have you ever been hit with a gallon of milk? And Denton's like, no. And then that's when Denton decided, hey, what else I gotta lose? So they go to the store, and according to Lynn Denton, they buy up 10 gallons of 10, I'm assuming 10 gallons or 1 gallons of, well, it looked like from the footage they had, basically 2 gallons of milk, along with Cheerios, and basically used it to humiliate Bryan Adams. They had Bryan Adams, who went on to become Crush in WWF, as well as part of Chronic later on, the tag team Chronic. They had him tied up, one arm, to each side of the ring by his arms in the middle, and he was like lying in the middle of the ring, and they're basically hitting him with cereal, with Cheerios and milk and everything. And according to Denton, the welt started to really rise up, started to show on on Adams's chest, because of how hard they were smacking him with all this milk and cereals. And Don Owens wasn't happy about that, because as soon as they got back, he lashed into them. He's like, you idiots, like, do you know how much it's going to cost me to get that cleaned up? And it's because of that they got the name of, the Breakfast Club, or to paraphrase what OTR Central would say about the likes of John Cena, Triple H, Randy Orton, and all them. He calls them the Breakfast Club because of, the behind-the-scenes politics and stuff. Grappler Lynn Denton and John Nord, a.k.a. the Berserker, were the original OG Breakfast Club out of Portland. But yeah, they talked about all this, and they basically talked about, the final days when the original head of the news station said he basically took Denton aside and said, hey man, I'm going to be stepping aside. There's this new guy coming in, and with this new guy, it doesn't look like your time slot's going to be very favorable it's not going to be very favorable to last much longer, because apparently the new guy was more impressed with what Vince McMahon of WWF was selling, because everything was already taped, edited, in the can. Just plug it in, boom, you're done. Plug it in, boom, you're done, and off to the races you go. So what happened is, Denton eventually, after that, met up with Owens, and Owens says, hey, look, man, I'm out of here after the next 2-3 weeks. Because I think Owens got word what was going to happen, too. And, that was it. That was the end of Portland Wrestling. And according to people that reviewed the episode already, like Stall Monster, one of the reasons that happened wasn't just because they lost this time slot to WWF. It's because they still remained on Portland Wrestling, but they got jousted to very late at night. So because of that jousting to a very late night time slot, things just started to dwindle and go down from there. But overall, it was a pretty good episode. I'm not going to deny that whatsoever. I mean, one story they did talk about going to Mike Masters. He used to have the full Nelson, like Chris Masters would have the Master Lock. I guess that's where they got the inspiration from. And Masters' gimmick, when he would put it on, or his reasoning as a heel, is his fingers would swell up and he couldn't, get them untied or anything, So, basically, they had this event in Eugene, Oregon, and Don Owens was standing in for his brother Elton, because Elton would book Eugene and some other places, but mostly Eugene. And Don is like, okay, I want you to put Matt Bourne in that lock, or in that full Nelson lock, and not let go, because he wanted him to get heat. And Mike's like, okay, fine. And that's what happened. He put him in the lock, wouldn't let go. Fans were getting irritated, angry. They had rodeo guys, cowboy rodeo guys, posing as security for the night, basically pushing people back, knocking them down, having a good time out of it and everything. And Elton's reaction the following week, even though it resulted in a sold-out crowd, was, what are you trying to do, get me sued? Instead of like, hey, heard you guys got me a sold-out house because of what you did last week. Thanks. His reaction was, are you trying to get me sued? But yeah, that episode last week was pretty good, and I highly recommend you guys check it out when you get a chance, as I just took the time there. But now we go on to World Class, which came on last night, and I have to say they did a great job here. The talking heads they had, of course, was Kevin Von Erich. They had Brian Andrus, I think, Brian Adrian, Brian Adrian. They had Danny Manning, who was a referee and booker. They had, Jimmy Jam Garvin, gorgeous Jimmy Jam Garvin. And surprisingly, they had Chavo Guerrero Jr., because his dad, Chavo Guerrero, and his family, the Guerreros, worked with World Class, passed through there numerous times. But they did a fabulous job with this one. I'm not going to deny it. They did a fabulous job. They talked about things that I don't think even WWE, I should say, or even Dark Side of the Ring, or any documentary has touched upon. Like, for example, they talked about the fact that when they would go on to these international trips, there were several times that Chris Adams caused such an incident that, he either spent several months in jail for one of them, which he did, or he had to basically be snuck out of the country because of what he did. And the one he had to be snuck out of the country for was they were in Israel, for an event, because WCCW was so over in Israel that when they arrived there, they were basically like the freaking Beatles. People loved them. Anyway, they talk about a story where Adams, goes out to a bar, and Adams, and this is not the first time, because according to, I think it was, who was it? Was it Brian? Was it Brian Andren? It wasn't Danny Manning. Was it Danny Manning? I can't. I gotta go back and watch it again. But they recall basically, because again, what happened in Israel was not the first time this happened, because what happened in Israel was he was on his own, because gentleman Chris Adams, loved to drink. He was a heavy drink. He loved to drink and everything, heavy drinker. But what would happen is when he would drink, he would basically black out. He wouldn't know what he was doing. Why? He'd get so basically he'd basically get so drunk and all that, he wouldn't know what he was doing. So what happened is he gets into this confrontation with this bartender in Israel, to the point that as they're getting into it, and this bartender's gonna go after him, Chris Adams ends up super kicking him right in the face, knocking him down, and it causes his eye to pop out. Basically, the bartender loses his eye. So what happens is, because they're in another country, Danny Manning has to get Chris Adams out of that bar, get him back to the hotel and everything. Get the keys, because I think the hotel person's like, hey, you know, this is what a passport's are, or something like that. Basically, you get here, you gotta, you know, this is where you can find the passports if you need them to get them out of here, or something like that. Anyway, what happens? Long story short, Manning finds the passports. Ironically, the one with Chris's, gets him to dress up in this hoodie-like outfit, put on sunglasses, drive him to the airport, and then basically hoping that, okay, we got one, hoping that, you know, they can get him out, right? And as soon as they get to the airport, according to the dramatization, they encounter a security officer at the airport, at the terminal, wanting to see the passport. So, Manning's thinking, oh, please God, please God, please God, you know, please let us get through this. And fortunately, the security guard, you know, let him through, or at least let Adams through, and Adams flew out of the country. And I think what happened later, they had another international incident in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And I think this was months after they did the Israel thing. I think it was months after, because it sounded like the way they were describing it, it was not that both incidences, if you will, were not that far apart from each other. So what happened is Adams drank again on the plane, and the flight attendant got in his face, or at least tried to get in his face, or something happened, to the point that Adams, you know, basically pulled the flight attendant up a little bit, pulled him up like this, and I guess basically headbutted him unconscious, to the point that it split both their heads open. And what happened, because if you tie a pilot or a flight attendant, it's a federal offense even to this day. Adams spent months in prison because of that. You know, months behind bars because of that incident and what I think he had done in Israel. So they connected the two incidences and figured out, okay, this is the guy. So yeah, you know, that, because again, the way they made it sound like, you know, the way they were telling it, it was not that far apart, the events. You know, so, but yeah, it wasn't. But yeah, the Israel and the flight attendant thing were not the first times Adams has been like this. You know, where he'd black out, be belligerent, and all that. Brian Adrian, I think that's what his name was, who was a wrestler there. He basically talked about a story where he and Chris had done. They had just finished doing a show in Texas, which wasn't in a Texas town, which wasn't far across from the border of Mexico. I think it was Las Cruces or La Cruces. I think I don't know what it was, what town it was, but it was not that far away from the border. So, you know, Adams suggests, let's go over the border, you know, have a few drinks, you know, let's go over the border, have a little fun, you know, maybe have a few drinks and be done, right? Well, basically, Brian, I think that's what his name, Brian Adrian, said that this was the first and last time he'd ever drank, you know, with Chris, because what happened is Chris was getting so belligerent that he basically said some derogatory remarks about the people there. And basically, according to what Brian said, they were the only people, the only gringos, essentially, in that area. They were the only white people. And Adams got so belligerent that he said some derogatory remarks that basically got the attention of several people there, to where they basically went to the side, made a signal of what they were about to do, and that's when Brian basically said, "Chris, we got to get out of here." And they started running, and they were running as they were getting fired at and everything. So Adrian basically said he ran as fast as he could, because I guess the town wasn't too far from the border and all that. So he said he got out of there as fast as he could, ran as fast as he could to the hotel, which again, I guess wasn't that far away from the border, got back over the border, and got to his hotel room. And at the moment, you know, Chris, you know, came back into the hotel, you know, Brian just basically went reared back and smacked him right in the face, you know. And Chris wondered what happened. Chris, the next day, wondered what happened, you know, and everything, and wondered, I guess, why Brian punched him. And, you know, he couldn't remember, and Adrian had to remind him this is what happened. So yeah, basically, Chris, basically the pattern there in this storytelling when it comes to Chris Adams was he loved to drink. And if you were with him, you need to either be the designated driver, or you need to be the responsible one and not let him drink anymore. Because I think that's what happened with the flight attendant. He was drinking and they cut him off, and it pissed him off, and that's what led to the thing with the flight attendant. Anyway, they talked about that story. Of course, they touched upon the Freebirds and the Von Erichs, and how that basically launched WCCW right into the stratosphere, and basically was the attention grabber to, you know, get people of all names in wrestling at that time to come in and be part of WCCW. And they mentioned that when they did it, that basically it all stemmed, of course, as we all know, from the cage incident. But they basically say the way that Terry Gordy slammed it, it almost looked like it could have killed Kerry Von Erich. It almost looked like it could have killed him, because even Danny Manning had to go check on him and be like, you know, to see if there might have been an indention or something in his head, just the way he swung the cage back. Because if you watch the footage of that match, you see how hard Gordy, you know, basically wrenches that cage door back and then slams it in Kerry's face. You know, you would definitely believe, like, whoa, we know that was planned, but maybe he went a little too far, kind of deal. Anyway, they talked about that, touched upon how good it was and everything, and how it really helped drive WCCW into the stratosphere, like I said, and got the attention of a lot of notable names to come in and be part of the company. Speaking of the Freebirds, one of the members later on, not just in World Class, but places like WCW, Jimmy Garvin, they talked about how Ernie Ladd said, look, man, you're good in the ring. Because Jimmy Garvin used to wrestle in Florida, started out in Florida, but Jimmy said, you know, he had rode with Ernie Big Cat Ladd one time. And Ernie Ladd said, look, you're good in the ring, but, you know, a sweat jacket and, you know, burgundy colored shorts and black boots aren't going to cut it, man. You know, you need something. So Jimmy says, okay, what can I do? You know, what can I do to change myself up? And he remembered Gorgeous George, the original Gorgeous George, had a valet. So he said, okay, I'll do an 80s modern version of that. And, you know, and my valet will be Sunshine, who he revealed, I don't think he's ever revealed this before, as his cousin. Yeah, his cousin. So his cousin Sunshine was his valet. And then what happened is things got heated, not just on screen, but legitimately behind the scenes, when he decided to introduce Precious, his wife Patty, into the story as a subservient to Sunshine. Like, basically, you know, there's this angle, and they do talk about this in other documentaries as well, but they do touch upon it a little bit more here, to where basically Jimmy wanted to give Sunshine something, you know, as a gift. So so he decided, okay, I'm going to do something that nobody else has done, not presently or even in the past. I'm going to give my valet a valet. And that's when Precious came into the picture. But, you know, what happened was, obviously there was some tension behind the scenes. They do show footage of Precious, I think it's not Precious, but Sunshine, doing that press conference and everything. And then they showed footage of basically the fact that, you know, it was Patty that caused Jimmy to turn on Sunshine, because I think Sunshine was supposed to help Jimmy win a match, but that didn't happen because I think Precious got into an argument or to cause a distraction or something like that. They caused Jimmy's opponent, I can't think of his name right now, to roll him up and beat him instead of being the other way around. And Precious, in the typical heel fashion, said it was her. It was her. It was Sunshine, not me, her. So that's what caused the feud between Precious and Sunshine to kick off and be as legitimately real as I think anything in WCCW or wrestling at that time. Period. Because basically because honestly, let's be honest, even before this episode came out tonight, or last night, and these details came out, you could tell just by watching footage that there was something going on between these two, Sunshine and Precious, that basically was not an act. Like, yeah, they went out there and did business, but the way they would fight each other, you can kind of tell there was something more personal going on behind the scenes, and they were just getting the opportunity to let out that anger, that frustration, that tension between each other in front of the world. But yeah, they gave more details on Jimmy gave more details on the issue between the two and everything, and how it got him some heat and everything because of that, as well as Precious. But overall, that's about it. They did. I think they did talk about the fact that the Precious, the heel turn against Sunshine, also happened to coincide with Jimmy's feud with David Von Erich. So, they didn't go much into more than just that, but to kind of get it from Jimmy's mouth himself that, yeah, these that some of these story angles using real life family members and all that could get a little bit more personal, not just on screen but behind the screens. It's not surprising. And even Jimmy admitted that the whole one guy, two girls scenario just doesn't really work in wrestling that much as it should have, even back then. They do talk about how Terry Bam Bam Gordy, he could be a nice guy to you if you got to know him and he got to know you, but if you got on his bad side, look out. And they talk about a time that he went and crashed his car into a car dealership because his car wasn't ready, and he got out of his car, got onto the hood of his car, and pissed all over the office floors of the car dealership. And this is ironic because the one thing I didn't mention in the Portland episode is they talk about how Rowdy and the Bushwhackers, or the sheep herders as they were known back then, or the Kiwi sheep herders as they were known back then, they got pulled over for possession of marijuana. They got taken to the courthouse. They got taken to the judge's house to the judge's house at 2 a.m, and then to the courthouse where they paid a $250 fine. And basically what happened is after they left, they decided to go around to the back of the courthouse, right where the window was, looking into the office of the judge as he's counting the fine money. And they decided, Rowdy and Butch, to piss all over the window. And I think they did get caught, but they got out of there as quickly as they could or something like that before anything could be done. Well, once again with this one, you had somebody pissing, and that was Terry Bam Bam Gordy, out of anger for the fact that his car wasn't ready. And even though he crashed his car into the dealership through the windows, basically the dealership people were like, "Oh, we're sorry, Mr. Gordy, we're sorry." They're trying to apologize for not having it ready when it should have been. But yeah, you had stories like that, happening and stuff. You had a story where basically they talk about how they wasn't that where they wouldn't just be playing the Sportatorium in Dallas and all that, but they'd also be going to smaller rural towns as well, because the money was good there, small audience, but it was good. And they talk about how they went into, I think it was Lawton, Texas, and the main event was Ric Flair and Kerry Von Erich for the championship. And what happened is during the match, Danny Manning, who was the booker, the referee, and I guess security guy at times, was basically approached by the ticket sailor, the box office, the ticket booth sailor, or the attendant at the ticket booth, the box office. Basically, Danny Manning hears something of he took the money. He took the money. So what happens is somebody decides during the main event to rob the box office in this small town, and Manning's going after this guy. He's chasing him out the building, chasing him out of the building. He's got a gun on him. He starts firing. As soon as they get to this bridge, which is obviously in the back of the building, a little further, a little away from the building, but not too much, like walking distance, he starts firing at this guy, in the air, until he runs out of bullets. So he continues to chase the guy over the bridge. The guy basically ducks into a dirt area, and as soon as Danny goes to look for him, the guy tries to jump out and attack Danny, and Danny takes his gun and just whacks the guy right in the head, knocks him down, busts him open, and then that's when the police show up, arrest the guy, and Danny explains the situation. And then according to him, what they do, instead of arresting him for allegedly maybe shooting the guy in the face or something like that, because when he hit him with his gun in the face, it broke his teeth, broke his upper mouth and his nose and all that. But basically what happened is Danny was surprised when they didn't arrest him, but instead the officer was like, man, you could have saved us a lot of paperwork, I guess they wanted him to be shot or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, according to what he says, is that they decided as a favor to reload up his gun with enough ammunition so that next time something like this happens, he has enough, bullets to fire with, just in case, somebody else attempts the same thing. And according to Manning, when he got back, Ric Flair heard about it, and Rick was like, what, you shot the guy? And it's like, Manning's like, no, I just knocked him out with a gun. But anyway, yeah, the stories they told here were pretty good. There is no doubt. They were pretty good. Again, some of them we had not really heard that much about. Some of them we had, but not in the detail we did. And I thought it was a very good episode. I thought it was a good love letter, to WCCW, different than what we'd seen any other documentary or interviews or whatever on World Class. Because, yeah, they did touch upon the tragedies of the Von Erich brothers passing, except, with the exception of Kevin. But that's about it. They didn't touch upon Chris Adams passing. They did touch upon Gino Hernandez or anything. Basically, this was like a true, which should be looked at, as I should say, as a true love letter to World Class Championship Wrestling. And I thoroughly recommend you guys check it out. It is very, very good. Very good. In fact, watching this got me to go back and look up on YouTube the Legends reunion on Raw Homecoming back in 2005 in Dallas when Kevin Von Erich, after the Legends beat up on Rob Conroy for being disrespectful to them by interrupting them, you have the American Dream hitting the flip-flop and fly. You have Von Erich basically attach the Von Erich claw. And according to someone that commented in the comment section, they said they were there and the whole place was shaking. Because, let's be honest, whether people want to admit it or not, Dallas, Texas is always going to be Von Erich country. No matter what. It's always going to be Von Erich country. No matter how big of a building you sell out, or small of a venue you sell out, if you have the Von Erichs on there, like if you have Kevin's sons on there right now, they're going to get a reaction that's like a pop star reaction, period. And that's a fact. That is a fact. But, yeah, another very good episode. And like I said, I highly, highly recommend you guys check it out. You will thoroughly enjoy it. Next week, they're going to talk about Jim Crockett Promotions. And they got looks like a who's who on the round table here. They got Jim Cornette. They got Arn Anderson on there. I think they had somebody else. I can't think of who else they had. But yeah, they got almost like a who's there. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. I will. There's no doubt about it. But yeah, very good episode. And to me, a very good love letter to World Class. And that's all I'm going to say. But that's pretty much my 2-for-1 review on both weeks of the recent episodes of Tales from the Territory, Portland Wrestling, and World Class. I highly recommend you check them out. Big shout out to Brian Zane, Wrestling with Regret. Again, he's one of the reasons that I got to know a little bit more about Portland wrestling, and he's one of the main reasons why Portland wrestling is back in a way that it is with Power Pro Wrestling, so PPW. So yeah, big shout out to him, and I think Brian, if you've not checked out this episode yet, which I'm sure you have, you'll definitely like the Portland wrestling one because it's like a love letter, not just to Portland wrestling itself and its history, but also to Buddy Rose. Just like, to me, I appreciate the fact that this one on WCCW World Class is a love letter to the company itself. Because I'll be honest with you, when I was a kid and I flipped through the channels, as a fan, I would see AWA on ESPN, but sometimes I would see another wrestling promotion. I would think it was AWA, but looking back at the footage that always gets shared in documentaries and stuff, even this one, I realized that it wasn't just AWA I was watching on ESPN, it was also World Class. So, really appreciate that. Really appreciate the fact that this was, like I said, a true love letter to the history of that territory. But that's all I'm going to say, guys. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. Comment if you like. Live chat during the premiere. Like the video. Hit the subscribe and bell button for notifications of the new upcoming content when it shows up on my channel. Also, support me over at patreon.com. So that's BW Roses with the $1, $3 tier. Also, support me at Venmo at Brian-Roma-2, Cash App at BW Roses98. Well, financially, I will get your support right away. Also, support me over at my Teespring store for not content, but for merchandise. You can't get anywhere else except there, especially in time for the Christmas holiday. Also, check me out at BW Roses Discussions, all your favorite audio podcast locations except for Pandora. I got several new audio podcast versions of the YouTube videos you see here on my channel. You will also possibly see I should say, a podcast version of this as well. Also, check me out at DeviantArt.com, so that's BVW1979. And at VENMO at BW Roses for content you can't get anywhere else. But yeah, guys, that's about it. That's all I'm going to say. Again, give me your thoughts in the comments and in the live chat, and I will talk to y'all later.